Japan's First Lady has sickening surprise for Trump the second he sits down next to her at dinner. One of the biggest question marks that went along with President Trump carrying the Republican nomination was the question of how he would deal with diplomacy. Typically we have someone in this position that has had a history of dealing with other politicians, but that wasn't the case with this first-time politician. Obviously, the people who voted for him thought he'd do an okay job, and so far so good. However, this doesn't keep the left from trying to convince America that they need to bite their nails down the quick every time the president makes a diplomatic mission overseas or even hosts a foreign leader here at the White House. Contrary to popular belief, the president has been doing just fine, but possibly those visiting are not. The president and First Lady have been forging a relationship with the Japanese president and First Lady, and the question has arisen as to whether the foreign First Lady, Abe, just really insulted the president. Apparently, when the president was seated by her for a dinner, she didn't speak a word to him the whole evening, leading him to believe that she didn't speak English. But that's just not the case. Left scoop. In his disastrous interview Wednesday with the New York Times, Donald Trump said the Japanese First Lady Abe doesn't speak English. However, several videos have shown her speaking the language. Trump told the Times that Abe, who he called a terrific woman, doesn't speak English, not hello. He said a Japanese interpreter sat with them at the dinner. A video was going viral Thursday on social media showing Abe giving the keynote address at a Ready Asia Pacific Symposium on Coastal Resilience in New York in 2014. In the clip, Abe reads a roughly 15-minute speech before finishing with a smile, bow and a thank you very much. Shinzo Abe visited Trump in February, holding a meeting and press conference at the White House before spending a weekend at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. President Trump is working off the assumption that those who come on diplomatic missions wouldn't intentionally do things to ruin their mission. However, even though the left would jump down President Trump's throat for doing anything that could put international relations in jeopardy, they're applauding the wife of another nation's leader for ignoring our president. Talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face. This is what the left wants you to think about what happened with the president and the Japanese First Lady. However, we all know that their cutlery is very much different than ours, and there might just be another side of the story, but don't tell the liberals, we're all sick of hearing the winning. And that from a BBC correspondent. The left isn't letting it slow them down though. Here's a little bit more in-depth left commentary about how the dinner went down. Just do your best not to choke on the Trump hatred, it's pretty thick. Via Pedestrian TV. Dinner parties are the worst when you're seated next to someone who's either A, obnoxious, B, deeply unfunny, or C, a general shit cunt. So spare a thought for the First Lady of Japan, who was recently forced to sit next to someone who's all three of those things, Donald Trump. Abe, wife of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, drew the short straw at a dinner to mark the end of the G20 summit in Hamburg on July 8, and did the only thing one could do when faced with hours of conversation with a Dorito. She pretended not to speak English. Not even enough to greet him with a hello. The best bit? Trump had no idea what was going on, and still doesn't. In an interview with the New York Times, he put the lack of conversation with Mrs. Abe, sick, down to the language barrier. So, I was seated next to the wife of Prime Minister Abe, Shinzo Abe of Japan, who I think is a terrific guy, and she's a terrific woman, but doesn't speak English, he said. Asked if it was nothing, like zero, he replied, not hello. He went on to say the evening was hard because the meal went on for probably an hour and 45 minutes. He added, so I'm sitting there. There was one interpreter for Japanese, 'cause otherwise it would have been even tougher. But I enjoy the evening with her, and she's really a lovely woman, and I enjoyed, the whole thing was good. U.S. journalist Sam Thielman was first to spot the discrepancy, pointing out that Mrs. Abe speaks very good English. In fact, pre-politics, she worked at one of the biggest ad agencies in the world. Thielman also linked to a YouTube video that shows her delivering a keynote address, again, in English, for the Ford Foundation back in 2014. We don't know what her intentions were, and we don't know what previous experiences she's had with diplomats or even the president himself, but what we do know is that the president did the right thing and assumed the best about her, which is that she had some good reason for not speaking that evening. Maybe she didn't, but him hurling insults, the way the left is, would only have strained the relationship between the United States and Japan, and that's not something the president is prepared to do over the loss of a little dinner conversation. She was rude, and he said nice things about her anyway. That's called having class. Write it down. Down.